Hey everybody, welcome to the 1947 Rise podcast, a podcast that helps India born, US trained Indians get integrated into the Indian technology ecosystem and inspires them to move back to India to build massive tech companies and or help enable the tech ecosystem. We do this by interviewing India born, US trained Indians who have moved back to India and built massive tech companies themselves and or helped enable the tech ecosystem. Awesome. I'm excited to have Sashank Rishyasringa from the 1947 Rise today. Shashank is the co-founder of Axio, India's leading consumer finance company offering pay later, credit, and personal finance management under one seamless brand experience. Earlier, Axio was known as Capital Float. Axio is backed by one of the best investors globally, the likes of Elevation Capital, Sequoia India, Lightrock, Creation Investments Capital Management LLC, Ribbit Capital, and Amazon. Before moving back to India and founding Axio, Shashank got his undergrad from Princeton, MBA from Stanford, and worked at McKinsey and Company in New York. Shashank, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Shiva. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So let's dive right into it. Would love for you to just, walk us through your journey of growing up in India and then, moving to the US. What made you move back to India and how was the move like in the beginning?
Sure, Shiva. So just to take you through it, I think briefly, I grew up in Mumbai. I went to school here till the age of 16. Then on a lark, applied for a scholarship program to the United World Colleges and ended up being fortunate enough to get a place in the one in the UK. Spent 2 years there studying with kids from about 100 different countries, which was an incredible experience. Was fortunate again to get a full scholarship to attend Princeton, where I did a liberal arts degree, studied economics with a lot of history mixed in. Then actually moved to New York. So I spent almost 4 or 5 years there at McKinsey, working with a range of different types of sectors. So spent time in financial services, in public policy, advising governments in Asia as well as in India on financial product innovation for the next billion consumers. And then decided, there was an itch to move back to India, and to actually build something of meaning and impact here. And that led me to kind of look for a place where I would start to think differently. And for me, that place ended up being Stanford. I spent 2 years in the Valley doing my MBA, which ended up being a very fertile ground for thinking through ideas, and also where I met my fellow co-founder Gaurav. We decided, without actually having a clear sense of what we wanted to build, we decided that we wanted to build something together. And we were a team first before a company.
Yeah.
And moved back to India right after. Spent about a year kind of, noodling around trying to figure out where we could make the highest impact. Ended up picking access to credit and access to finance. And it's been a roller coaster journey since then. So yeah, that's a quick summary of my journey so far.
Yeah. Shashank, so you met your co-founder at Stanford, and sure, you guys were spending time together, figuring out, okay, let's move back, let's start a company together. Would love for you to, tell us the founding story of Axio. Earlier, it was known as Capital Float.
Yeah, absolutely right. So, I said this actually started as a team, right? We were two people who, with very different skill sets, very different backgrounds. I come from more of a strategy and finance background, having worked outside India. Gaurav, my co-founder, comes from a deep operating experience background, having actually run a company in India and sold it. And so we decided at first that, as friends who trusted each other and had complementary skill sets, we wanted to team up, right? And I think we also discovered a common passion to come back to India and make a difference, right? Mm-hmm. And so I still remember that the first thing we did was actually sit down in the library at Stanford and say, what are the 2 or 3 principles that are going to underpin our effort and our move to go back to India? And we came up with 3 things. The first was we wanted to build something of scale, right? We didn't want to play for small change. And we defined scale as $1 billion of enterprise value initially and eventually $1 billion of revenue, right?
Mm-hmm.
The second thing we said is we want to build something where technology is the differentiator, right? Because we believe that India was needed to use technology to leapfrog the traditional constraints around infrastructure, access to essentials, etc. Even though we weren't technologists, we had a passion for the role it could play. And
Yep.
thirdly, and most importantly, we wanted to build something with impact. We wanted to build something that actually made a tangible, quantifiable difference in the lives of a very large number of people in this country. And so that began a journey. I wish I could tell you it all. We figured it all out in the first few months. We didn't. We actually looked at about 40 different ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And found that for every idea we came up with, there was someone really talented already building a business. In some cases, 3 people building a business.
Yeah.
But what we actually kind of discovered through that process was there was a horizontal gap across all of these ideas, and that was access to finance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The fundamental problem in India was we found that access to finance was really the common gap across all of these efforts.
Yeah, and I think you are, going after a very impactful problem, I would say, because really, in order to expand a country's GDP, you have to get the credit system right for any economy, right? Uh, w- I'll step back a bit. What was the aha moment for you and Gaurav, Shashank, that, okay, this is it. This is where we are going all in this segment while you were building it?
It's an interesting question, Shiva, because in our case, there were actually 2 aha moments.
Yeah.
Right? I think the first was when we actually started from scratch and we had just launched a website where you could apply for credit. And suddenly we saw someone apply from a town called Bhilwara, which is so about, I think, several hours away from Jaipur by road.
Mm-hmm.
And they were an e-commerce sort of self-employed e-commerce seller. And they wanted credit, right? And we called up and said, hi, we just saw you checked out our website. Like, tell us what's this all about. And he's like, look, I run a business and I'm looking for capital to grow. And I'm sitting here, like, there's no bank branch near me, but I saw an ad from you and I thought I'd check out your website and see if I could apply. We're like, sure, please, like,
Mm-hmm.
5 clicks and you're done, right? And so I think that was, for us, the first illustration of how, just as technology had allowed e-commerce to leapfrog into the hinterland of India, it could actually do the same for financial services, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the second aha moment for us was actually during COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we had been through a pretty turbulent time as an industry and as a company in the couple of years before COVID, right? After a sunshine period for the sector, there was the ILFS-led NBFC crisis that dried up liquidity. And then right as everyone was recovering from that, COVID hit and we had a lockdown and we had a moratorium, right?
Yeah.
And I think the reaction, at least in fintech and even in financial services, was, oh my God, is this like a doomsday scenario? Like, will we all survive this? And we had that fear too, right? And suddenly we started to see something very interesting happen, which is we started to see transactions pick up. We started to see customers start to sign on to our product through partners like Amazon and others, right? And when we entered COVID, I think we had about 300,000 customers. By the time the vaccines rolled out and the lockdown started to ease, we had got to about 2 million customers. Right? We added more customers over that 1 year than we did in the 7 years before that. So, and I think what that did for us is actually show us that, India had hit that hockey stick growth, right? Whatever digital adoption we expected to see over the next 5 years, COVID had accelerated that.
Yeah.
Within 12 months.
Yeah.
And it showed the power of, what a digital first approach could do. And it also showed us that we could get to scale, right? So 2 million customers today, 4.5 million customers. It's taken years to get there. Most of that scale has come in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. And so to your question on, what was it like to move back? I think the one thing I'll say is all of us who live outside India have a lot of FOMO to come back to India.
Yeah.
We're always told, you have to come back. Like it's now or never.
Yeah.
And India always gets better.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so each time you look at it, you're like, oh, actually things have materially moved and there's a chance to build bigger and better this time.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's a bit of a cliche, but I do think that Just as we saw that the last 2 years were, 10x better than the 6 years before that,
Yeah.
I think the next 2 years will be 10x better than those. And so life as an entrepreneur here means that you cannot sit on your laurels. It also means that, things are always on the up and up. So that's exciting.
I absolutely agree with you. In fact, we were talking about this earlier. It's still the beginning, right? It's the ecosystem is only gonna accelerate at a very fast speed, I would say. And you guys are laying the foundation for the next set of entrepreneurs or next technologies that will come in. Uh, Shashank, as back to my point, credit is such an important p in any economy. So right now, UPI has really transformed the entire digital ecosystem, and then now we have payment gateways, and now we have axio and a bunch of other companies that are making easier for people to get loans. Let's say you're telling a 10-year-old the evolution of, let's say, the credit system in India, how it kind of, like, when you came, how was it in the beginning, where are we today, and what do you see next in this ecosystem, I would say the lending or the credit ecosystem?
Shiva, I think when we first moved back to India, fintech was barely a term, right? And when we went around, raising our seed round and told people we were going to do lending through technology, I think most people laughed, right? Because the dominant paradigm at the time was financial services is a brick and mortar game in India, right? They were playing with your passbook, stuck it under that scanner. It told you what your transactions were. And that was if you were a depositor, right? If you actually wanted credit, it was actually quite a laborious process, right? Lots of forms, paperwork, etc. And most fundamentally, if you wanted credit in India, I think prior to 2010, you actually needed an asset. The reality is no country in the history of the world without an expansion in retail credit, cash flows, not assets. And so that was kind of circa 2012-13, the state of affairs, right?
Yeah.
We began to try and make a dent in this landscape, as did others. And it was slow going for a few years, right? And then suddenly in about 2016-17, three like dramatic things happened, right?
Yeah.
And you said, how would you explain it to the 10-year-old? And the way I would say it is, one, thanks to Geo, everyone got smartphones and cheap data.
Yeah.
Two, everyone got UPI on their phones. You could send money to someone else phone to phone. And three, demonetization happened, which meant everyone started to move towards digital payments, right?
Yeah.
And I think these three things that actually happened in the middle of our journey are completely changed the game, right?
Yeah.
In many ways has shaped the growth that we've all seen over the last 3 or 4 years, right? Now it's very common for customers to sign up for a credit card or a personal loan or a checkout finance product digitally. People are using apps to manage their money, invest better, check their bank balances. It's starting to become like the norm almost, right? And if you think about what happens in the future, I actually think that, financial services started out being local, right? In the 40 years ago, our parents would have had a branch manager in a public sector bank who they'd known for ever since they were kids. That person knew your family, knew your finances, and knew how to advise you. Then financial services became industrialized. You had the large banks, and everything got processized, right? Think about how many times your relationship manager has changed in a bank, right? Over the last 5 years. Mine has changed 5 times, right? I think the best analogy for this is, and you were in a rental store growing up, right? You called the guy and you said, boss, can you send me something? And he knew which 3 movies to suggest you that you would like, right? That's what Netflix did in the last 10 years, right? Netflix actually was able to completely industrialize video delivery, but personalize it and actually be able to predict what you like. And I think that is the next frontier of financial services in India, where if you're an individual, let's say you're running a business or you're a salaried person, we should be able to actually meet your needs as they arise and even predict them even before you realize that you need something. So that products actually start to come at your fingertips, right? You actually can get that credit line when you need it, not when it's convenient for the lender to give it to you.
Yeah.
You actually are told when you need to save that little extra to meet your goal of buying a dream car before you yourself realize that you're on track. And so I think the personalization of finance through technology, just like what Netflix did to brick and mortar VHS rentals,
Mhm.
that's the holy grail for us next.
So good to see how things are evolving and now so quickly. Shashank, it has been a long journey and still a long way to go. There's a lot of ups and downs in an entrepreneur's life. Mostly a lot of downs, I would say. Shashank, two parts to it. First, what drives you? What keeps you going when things are not working out? And secondly, how do you make tough decisions?
So Shiva, I think the single biggest thing that gets us out of bed in the morning is making an impact,
Yeah.
right? I think you mentioned at some point that we're all laying foundation stones in India. And
Mm-hmm.
that is hugely inspiring to me. And probably the biggest reason I moved back from the US is it felt like whatever I would do there would be incremental. I had a chance here to try, fail, succeed, but whatever I did could actually be part of the building blocks of the new economy.
Mm-hmm.
And when you actually turn that into people and customers and see the impact that it has on the ground, that is, I think our North Star, right?
Yeah.
And then what reminds us of that, and especially when, as you said, I personally sometimes would go through moments of, questioning things and wondering if, it's all going in the right direction, is to
Mm-hmm.
come to work and actually see the rest of our team being
Yeah.
driven by that same sense of purpose and mission.
Yeah.
And, that creates the energy to constantly recommit to the larger goal and keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's hugely motivating. And I think the fun in our business is we constantly hear stories from the ground of customers where we have actually been able to make a meaningful contribution in their life.
Yeah.
Right? And we talked about COVID, but there are several stories from COVID. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There was a lady who was working and doing a PhD part time in Calcutta.
Mm-hmm.
During lockdown, couldn't access the library. Needed to buy some pretty complicated digital storage equipment to do the analysis for the thesis. Did it through our pay later product, and then wrote to us saying, thanks to you, I was actually able to finish my PhD on time. Right? I mean, these things are hugely motivating for us
Mm-hmm.
because this is what the new India is all about. So I think that's really what kind of gets me out of bed
Yeah.
in the morning.
Got it. Love it.
Could
And
you remind me? Could you remind me about the second part of your question?
yeah, yeah. And how do you make tough decisions?
I think the single hardest area of decision making, Shiva, for us is focus,
Yeah.
right? Because building a startup needs you to be an eternal optimist, right? And so you always want to be open to new things and you always want to try new things. And then being in India is very exciting because you could go in infinite directions because the opportunity is so vast and the gaps are so big. So it's almost a double whammy, right? You have the optimism and openness of being a startup founder, and then you have the excitement that comes out of building in India.
Mm-hmm.
And what that can sometimes do is it can sometimes lead to spreading yourself too thinly as a founder and as a business.
Yeah.
And very candidly, we have gone through periods where I think we did too many things and we weren't good at saying no to things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the flip side of being in India is I truly believe that in India, ideas are a dime a dozen. It comes down to execution.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if strategic execution is the differentiator between winning and losing,
Yeah.
that comes down entirely to focus, like rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And
Mm-hmm.
focus comes from being able to say no to things.
Yeah.
And so I think the single thing that, has been for us something that we have grappled with and tried to get better on is how to, avoid FOMO and create focus.
Yeah.
And it's not something, you do once or you do at an annual retreat, right? It's a day-to-day adventure of sitting down as a team and constantly going back to first principles and be like, this could be a really exciting idea, but is it really core? Can we do justice to our existing business if we also expand into this territory, right?
Yeah.
And it's and being able to actually kind of make those decisions and say that, hey, look, right now we're not going to do this. This is not aligned to our core competencies. Do we really have a right to win here? Is
Mm-hmm.
it too soon? Are we doing too many things? I think in this environment and in lending in particular,
Yeah.
um, that is sort of, I would say, the single kind of balancing act that we strive to, and often fall short on.
Yeah. And what is a magical, or I would say, superpower that you see in your co-founder Gaurav that he might not even know
So
about?
I think the biggest superpower that Gaurav has is he is literally one of the fastest executors I've ever seen or worked with. Right? Probably the fastest, right?
Yeah.
If we have an idea tomorrow, Gaurav will have it built like tonight,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that ability to actually move quickly in India and actually build something from 0 to 1, I think that's been a huge asset to us as a business, right? And I really think that's a superpower because we often make excuses in India. We blame
Yeah.
the infrastructure, we blame the electricity, we blame the government. But the reality is, it actually comes down to a work ethic, right?
Mhm.
And I think people like Gaurav who are able to, cut through the fog and
Yeah.
actually get stuff done. I think that is a true superpower in this environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, clear thinking, focus, and actions. I think action is such a powerful trait. If one person just add it, doesn't matter. Like it just mostly focus on action. Ultimately, you'll figure things out. And Shashank, what's the magical outcome that you see for Axio, for your team, for co-founders?
I think it all comes back to the customer, Shiva. Right?
Yeah.
The magical outcome for us is firstly being able to serve the largest number of customers possible. Right?
Hmm.
We're at just short of 5 million today, and I think we have a long way to go. Right? There are over 100 million consumers in India who shop online and don't have a credit card and deserve a digital finance partner. Right?
Hmm.
I think the second is for these customers, we want to be able to be their financial partner of choice, right? And we want to earn that.
Yeah.
And that means, being there when it's rainy, right? Not
Hmm.
just when it's sunny.
Yeah.
It also means delivering products and services with rigor, right? We've talked about growth and we've talked about the importance of speed. I think in this business, rigor is crucial to
Hmm.
build something sustainable because in lending, you grow too fast, you give out too much, you borrow too much. That's a recipe for disaster. And
Hmm.
I think, we are the first sort of credit line for about 60% of our customers. That's a huge responsibility, right? And so how we, set our exposure caps correctly, how we give the right amounts to customers that they can borrow, how we actually are transparent about pricing and things like that. I think that's super important to creating a sustainable franchise over time. Equally, we want to play our part for customers to manage their own money with rigor,
Hmm.
right? Because the way I always like to describe credit as it's like a power tool. It can change your life or it can actually become a trap. It's about
Yeah.
how you use it,
Yeah.
right? And so our goal is to over time to be able to give our customers the right tools to use this well and to achieve their goals in life, whatever that might be, right? And so this is why, for example, having an app that doesn't just do credit but also delivers the most comprehensive suite of money management tools in the market today is very much core to what we do because we want someone to set a budget at the same time that they use us to buy something on EMI,
Yeah.
right? We want someone to actually be on top of their expenses just as they use credit to buy something. And I
Yeah.
think this kind of balancing act of fiscal responsibility, but at the same time using credit to improve your standard of life. If we can really crack that for the next 100 million customers in India, I think we'll all feel very happy and it will feel quite magical to your original question.
Yeah. No, I can see that already on your face. And Shang, we'll switch gears here. What's your relationship with success? It could be professionally, it could be personally.
It's a fascinating question, Shiva, right? And if I'm very honest, I think that has evolved over time, right?
Hmm.
Um, because I think it's easy in startup life, particularly in the Indian ecosystem, to get swept up with PR and
Yeah.
awards and fundraising rounds, and all of the valuations and things like that. And the reality is, this is a long journey. Right? As someone once told us, India is a movie; it's not a picture, and you want to be around as long as possible to make the biggest impact.
Yeah.
And so, I think what we have done is, redefine success for us as two things. Right. The first is, are we doing excellent work? Are we giving it our best?
Mm-hmm.
And so, are we building the best product that we are capable of? Right? Are we delivering the scale that we're capable of? Is our back office customer service shop the best customer service in India? And are we there? Absolutely not, right? But is that our North Star? Yes, and that's super fulfilling. I'm seeing someone on social media, escalate something and then saying, "Hey, you guys really solved it, and thank you, we appreciate it," is a high for me, as much as raising a funding round, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the second, again, just coming back to this idea of impact, is actually success for us is really making a difference in enough people's lives, right? It doesn't have to be hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
Even one person is something, but actually making a tangible difference, right? And so, for example, last year we actually started to do impact studies where we said, look, how many of our customers have actually seen their credit score improve since they came with us? How many of our customers have seen an improvement in living standards when they started working with us, right? And so, getting better at quantifying and measuring this, that's a high, right? That's as much of a high as saying that your GMV grew, X% year on year. If anything, I think it's a bigger high.
Yeah. No, I'm sure like the stories that you hear, people that you've impacted through axio is probably just so it gives you a dopamine rush. And Shashank, is there something that you've changed your mind on recently?
I think we have changed our mind on um, how we think about growth,
Yeah.
right? I think for the first few years, growth was almost religion,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we actually went through a period when the NBFC crisis happened with the ILFS crash, where the right answer was to cut back.
Yeah.
And it was almost like our brains short circuited, right? Because in the startup world, like growth is religion, right? Like, how can you slow down? How can you not have a graph that goes up and to the right? And after a lot of angst, we actually cut back and we slowed down, right? And in retrospect, it was the best decision we made. It kept us going. We stayed in the game, and we
Mm-hmm.
also made decisions that ended up focusing on quality rather than quantity, right? We
Yeah.
actually doubled down on products that had better economics, better impact, that were more sustainable, and cut out things that we weren't good at, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's now very much a part of how we think about things, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think and the simple reason for that is risk, right? We are in the risk business more than even we are in the growth business,
Mm-hmm.
because we have to actually build a sustainable credit franchise, which means keeping NPAs low. And we brought that down now to like 1 to 1.5%. We need to keep it there. It also means ensuring that our customers at no point get over leveraged and we don't increase their risk.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been an interesting adventure, thinking about this more as a balancing act between growth and risk rather than thinking of it as a growth journey,
Yeah.
right? And, it sounds sort of very interesting and intellectual the way I've described it, but when you actually look at it on the ground, it means like fights at a management team level, at a team level, when you have, the growth teams, product team saying, we need to grow, we have targets, and the risk team says, no, we've not figured it out. And it's
Mm-hmm.
about finding the right balance between sometimes cutting back and going slower to go faster,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes actually changing your strategies to focus on a more profitable segment rather than a less profitable segment. And
Mm-hmm.
I think today we have a lot of talk in the startup environment about going back to profitability. I mean, we believe it's always been about that, right?
Yeah.
And even if in lending it's more amplified, but ultimately India, you're in a risk business as much as a growth business.
Mm-hmm.
And risk is about time, it's about compounding, and it's about patience, right?
Yeah.
And how do you? And for me, it's big. How do you accommodate both these angels
Yeah.
in your head at the same time?
Yeah.
And then how do you create that balance in the team? How do you create that strategic tension
Mm-hmm.
right from top to bottom in your team
Mm-hmm.
between growth and risk, so you make the right calls and you don't have the blind spots?
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And Shashank, a change that you would like to see in the ecosystem?
I would love to see. I would love to see. I think all of us
Mm-hmm.
be more focused on impact and more focused on sustainability.
Yeah.
Right. I think there is a tendency, and we have been at fault on this,
Yeah.
to think of the India game as a short game,
Yeah.
right? And it's not,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I think Gaurav and our minds, this is like a multi-decade commitment, right? Because it takes that long. And if you look at the most legendary companies of India, whether it's an Infosys or others, they all got built over a long period of time. And that's because compounding is like, the hidden force behind success in India, right? And I think I would love to see a lot more focus on compounding. I would love to see a lot more focus on thinking about returns over a much longer period of time.
Yeah.
And I would love to see a bigger orientation around going public, because I think ultimately the public markets are really the barometer of success, right? And I think what we've seen in India is the public markets are quite thoughtful about how kind of what does a sustainable business look like, right? And if we all build for that outcome, I think we will probably pursue more sustainable strategies, and I think we will build businesses that then can inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs, just as a Nandan Nilekani or an Narayanamurthy or a Kiran Mazumdar were our inspirations when we first moved back.
Yeah. No, in fact, that was my follow-up question. Who is that one person that you're just inspired by?
I think someone who just hands down has been hugely inspirational, and actually also someone who has been a mentor to us at points in the journey has been Nandan Nilekani.
Yeah.
I think few individuals in India have had that level of impact, both in the private sector and the public sector.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that ability to actually kind of continuously find ways to scale one's own impact that he has been able to do, starting with Infi, then Aadhaar, now Oaken and account aggregator. It's just been incredible.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I always felt I always found very impressive about the US is the way the private sector leaders want to get involved in public service, right? And the US has a tradition of people moving from the private sector into the public sector and back and forth. And I think that creates a lot of cross-pollination of ideas, and it brings a lot of, I think, talent into places that need it, right?
Yeah.
And I would love to see that in India, right? I think both Gaurav and I have a passion for, how do you kind of help build this country even beyond our own business, right?
Yeah.
And I think Nandan is a shining example of someone who has actually pulled that off successfully. There are not many examples here.
Yeah.
And so certainly a role model to me, and I think to both of us.
I think you're reading my mind. Sashank, if let's say money and attention are not needed anymore, and let's assume axio is not in the picture, what would you work on?
That's both an interesting and a tough question, because axio is like what I eat, breathe, and sleep.
It's your identity.
And have for the last several years, right? It is.
Yeah.
But I think, and this goes back to why I moved back, right? Is I just every time I thought of something in terms of an idea, whether it was in the private sector or even a public endeavor, it was always an idea centered on India. And so at some point, sitting in the US, I was like, all right, I think I need to. The universe is telling me something, right? That the right playground for, karma bhumi, as we put it, for me is actually India, and that's why I moved back, even though at the time I didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted to do. I think that remains true, right? And I think there are a few areas that are, I think, ripe for innovation in India, where a startup mindset can actually make a big difference, right? One is obviously access to finance. I think a second big one is climate. Right? I think we have a chance in India to actually shape the narrative on climate.
Yeah.
And actually leapfrog the West.
Yes.
Because everyone is figuring out climate at the same time, right? I mean, for the last 10 years in India, we've in some ways been taking our inspiration from what's worked in the US and China and Europe. We have a chance here to figure it out for everyone else.
Yeah.
And I think one big area is actually culture, right? I think India has one of the richest cultural heritages anywhere in the world, right? Yeah. But my experience of actually seeing that flow through when I was studying here and otherwise was a mixed bag, right? I think one of the things I would love to see in India is actually us, institutionalizing how we celebrate our culture and how we imbue the next generation with knowledge and pride in that, right? So how we think about celebrating art in India, how we think about talking about our history, how we think about talking about our business history, right? People don't realize this, but in the 17th century, India was the largest debt market in the world, and the richest banker was an Indian a Gujarati gentleman from Surat, right? So,
Mhm.
and how we also think about celebrating music and philosophy and religion. I always felt studying in the US
Mhm.
that the gold standard was, ancient Greece and Rome.
Yeah.
And I always wondered, why we weren't able to bring, our classical traditions at a similar level of attention and recognition.
Mhm.
And I think even in India today, when you talk about icons of business, we talk about Apple, we talk about
Yeah.
Amazon, when we talk about
Yeah.
big examples, we bring examples from the West, right? And that's great because I don't think parochialism is the right answer. I think we need to take the best from the world. And that's what India has done throughout its history, right? We have brought in the best and we have assimilated that into our culture and
Mhm.
our ethos. But I think as a generation, I think we need to be more proud and have more role models of from our past. And
Yeah.
that starts with education, it starts with exposure.
Yeah.
And so I would love to at some point figure out how to make that a part of a day-to-day life in India.
Yeah, yeah, no, hopefully, as you were mentioning it earlier, Nandan did it around Aadhaar and all that stuff. Maybe at some point, Shank comes in and it's around building those policies, right? Um, you know, we would love to see you being there. And Shashank, we know you because of Axio and tech entrepreneur. Who are you outside of work? What do your friends know you for?
I think my friends would probably know me as someone who can be quite sort of silly at times,
Mhm.
crack all sorts of um, jokes that sometimes land and sometimes don't. But I like to
Yeah,
keep things light and funny, both
yeah,
at work and outside. I would say.
yeah.
I think they would see me as someone who has a lot of interests and is constantly struggling to spend time on them. Right. So
Mhm.
I'm a very avid sort of fan of Indian classical music. I play the violin, Carnatic violin.
Mhm.
I have a passion for Indian history and India's place in the world over the last 700 years.
Yeah.
And I try to read widely around these areas. I
Mhm.
also believe, on a more lighter note, that we're living through the golden age of television. I think
Yeah.
we have actually some incredible content coming out. So I'm quite passionate about consuming that content and some of the
Yeah.
free time that I have and getting into it. So those are some of the things I enjoy to do just to unwind and exercise different parts of my brain. Um, Otherwise, I really love being a dad. I have a 3.5 year
Mhm.
old who is someone who keeps me on my toes and challenges me a lot. And yeah, my wife also actually moved back from the West
Mhm.
after education and career there, and is today working in building the climate ecosystem. So I think family and hobbies, whatever little time I have outside of Axio, and
Yeah.
that's probably how I would describe the way I spend my time these days.
Yeah. Love it, Shashank. I had so much fun. Thanks for really walking us through your journey, company building. I think you're going after a very important problem. It's a long one, and you're all in. You're in it for the long run. That, of course, I can see it comes across, and I'm excited for you. What's ahead of what's in the future for you and Axio and everyone in the team. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Shiva. It was a pleasure to be here and great to cover a wide range of subjects with you. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely.